More than 2,500 years ago, a prophecy was whispered across an ancient kingdom. It spoke of a child unlike any other. The wise men who gathered around his cradle made a prediction that would haunt an entire empire. They said the boy would become one of two things: either the greatest king the world had ever seen, or a spiritual teacher whose wisdom would echo through the centuries. No one knew which path he would choose. But what happened next was something no one expected. The boy grew up surrounded by unimaginable luxury. He lived in magnificent palaces. Servants attended to his every need. Music filled the halls day and night. Flowers bloomed wherever he walked. And yet, deep within his heart, something felt strangely incomplete. Then one day, everything changed. Beyond the walls of his protected world, he saw things he had never been allowed to see before. An old man, a sick man, a dead man, and finally, a wandering monk whose face seemed filled with a peace that could not be explained. That night, a question entered his mind, a question so powerful that it would eventually lead him to abandon everything he loved: his wealth, his future throne, his family, his entire world. Why would a prince who had everything choose to walk away from it all? What secret did he discover? What truth was so important that it was worth sacrificing a kingdom? Tonight, we journey back into the mists of ancient India to uncover one of history's greatest mysteries. This is not merely the story of a prince. It is the story of a man who dared to search for answers that most people spend their entire lives avoiding. And in doing so, he became the Buddha. Long before the world would know him as the Buddha, he was simply a child named Siddhartha. Yet from the moment he entered the world, people believed there was something unusual about him. Ancient stories tell of a dream experienced by his mother, Queen Maya, shortly before his birth. In that dream, a brilliant white elephant descended from the heavens and approached her surrounded by a mysterious light. When the royal priests heard of the dream, they interpreted it as a sign that an extraordinary soul was about to be born. When Siddhartha finally came into the world, celebrations spread throughout the kingdom. Messengers carried the news across villages and cities. Musicians played in the streets. The people rejoiced, believing the future of the kingdom had arrived. Soon, respected sages and holy men traveled to the palace to see the newborn prince. Among them was an elderly sage known for his wisdom. As he looked upon the infant, the room grew strangely quiet. The old man studied the child carefully. Minutes passed. No one spoke. Then, unexpectedly, tears began to form in the sage's eyes. The king's heart immediately filled with fear. He stepped forward and asked whether some terrible fate awaited his son. But the sage slowly shook his head. "No," he said softly. "This child is destined for greatness beyond anything you can imagine." The king felt relief wash over him. Yet the old sage continued to weep. Confused, the king asked why. The answer would remain in his memory for the rest of his life. "I do not cry because of the child," the sage replied. "I cry because I am old. I will not live long enough to hear the wisdom he will one day share with the world." The prophecy fascinated the kingdom, but also planted a seed of fear within the king's heart. The wise men had spoken of two possible futures. In one future, Siddhartha would become a powerful ruler who would bring glory to his kingdom. In the other, he would abandon wealth, power, and royal life in search of a higher truth. The king knew which future he wanted, and he became determined to prevent the second one from ever happening. If suffering was what inspired people to seek deeper answers, then Siddhartha would never experience suffering. If hardship caused people to question life, then hardship would never come near his son. The king ordered that only beauty surround the young prince. The palace gardens were made more magnificent than ever. Musicians entertained him daily. Teachers instructed him in every art and skill. Servants fulfilled every desire before he could even speak it aloud. Most importantly, the king gave strict commands. No elderly people were to appear before the prince. No sick people were to be seen near him. No funerals were to pass where he might witness them. The realities of life were carefully hidden behind the shining walls of the palace. And so Siddhartha grew up in what seemed like paradise. A world of endless comfort. A world without pain. A world without loss. A world without death. Or so he believed, because beyond those palace walls, reality was patiently waiting. And one day, reality would find him. For many years, Siddhartha lived exactly as his father had planned. The young prince grew into a handsome, intelligent, and compassionate man. He mastered the arts of leadership, learned the skills of a warrior, and enjoyed a life filled with luxury beyond imagination. Every day seemed perfect. Every season brought new celebrations. Every path he walked was lined with beauty. Over time, Siddhartha married a beautiful princess named Yasodhara. Before long, they welcomed a son into the world. To anyone watching from the outside, it appeared that he possessed everything a person could ever desire. Yet deep within him, a strange feeling had begun to grow. It was difficult to explain. It wasn't sadness. It wasn't loneliness. It was something more subtle, a quiet sense that something was missing. Sometimes, during grand celebrations, while music echoed through the palace halls and laughter filled the air, Siddhartha would find himself staring into the distance. He could not understand why, but a question seemed to linger in the corners of his mind. Is this all there is? The feeling grew stronger with each passing year. Eventually, Siddhartha asked permission to leave the palace grounds and explore the surrounding city. The request immediately troubled the king. For years, he had carefully controlled everything his son saw. Now that protection was at risk. Still, refusing the prince might only increase his curiosity. Reluctantly, the king agreed. But before Siddhartha's visit, royal servants rushed through the streets. The elderly were ordered indoors. The sick were hidden from sight. The poor were moved away from the roads. The city was transformed into a stage designed to support the illusion that life was beautiful and free from suffering. When the morning arrived, Siddhartha climbed into his chariot and rode through the city with his loyal companion, Channa. At first, everything appeared exactly as his father intended. The streets were clean. The people smiled. Children played happily. Merchants greeted the prince with respect. But then something unexpected happened. Along a narrow road, hidden from the preparations of the king's servants, Siddhartha saw a man unlike anyone he had ever seen before. The man's back was bent. His hair was white. His skin was wrinkled and thin. His hands trembled as he struggled to walk. The prince stared in confusion. The sight was so unfamiliar that he could barely understand what he was looking at. Turning to Channa, he asked a question that no grown man should have needed to ask. What is wrong with him? Channa hesitated. He knew this moment would change everything. Finally, he answered, "My prince, that man is old." Siddhartha frowned. "Old? Yes," Channa replied. "Time changes every living being. When people live long enough, their bodies become weak. Their strength fades. Their appearance changes." The prince felt a chill move through him. For several moments, he said nothing. Then he asked quietly, "Will this happen to everyone?" Channa lowered his eyes. "Yes, my prince. Even to kings? Yes. Even to queens? Yes. Even to me?" The answer came softly. "Yes. One day, it will happen to you as well." For the first time in his life, the perfect world around Siddhartha began to crack. The music of the palace suddenly felt distant. The pleasures that once seemed so important lost some of their shine. Because a terrifying realization had entered his mind. Everything he loved, everything he knew, everything he had ever believed to be permanent, was slowly moving toward change. And that was only the first door reality would open. Far darker discoveries still awaited him. That night, Siddhartha could not sleep. The image of the old man lingered in his thoughts like a shadow that refused to disappear. Again and again, he remembered the trembling hands, the bent back, the fragile body struggling against the weight of time. For the first time in his life, he understood that youth was not permanent. Beauty was not permanent. Strength was not permanent. Everything changed. Everything faded. And yet, as disturbing as this realization was, something inside him needed to know more. A few days later, Siddhartha once again left the palace with Channa. This time, the king's servants worked even harder to clear the streets. But fate seemed determined to reveal what had long been hidden. As the chariot moved through the city, Siddhartha suddenly noticed a man lying beside the road. The man's body shook uncontrollably. His breathing was uneven. His face was pale with suffering. From time to time, painful groans escaped his lips. The prince immediately turned toward Channa. What has happened to him? Channa's expression grew serious. My prince, he is sick. Sick? His body has been overcome by illness. Siddhartha stared at the suffering stranger. Until that moment, he had never imagined that a human body could become a prison of pain. He watched as the man struggled simply to breathe. Every movement appeared difficult. Every breath seemed like a battle. A feeling of unease spread through Siddhartha's chest. Then he asked the question he was beginning to fear. Can this happen to anyone? Channa nodded. Yes, my prince. Even the rich? Yes. Even the powerful? Yes. Even me? Again, the answer came. Even you. The word struck Siddhartha with the force of a storm. He had spent his entire life believing that wealth could protect people. That power could protect people. That privilege could protect people. Now he was discovering that sickness cared nothing for status. It entered palaces as easily as huts. It spared no one. The prince returned home troubled, but the deepest wound had not yet been opened. Sometime later, Siddhartha ventured outside the palace for a third time. The day seemed peaceful. The sun shone gently overhead. The streets were quiet. Then, in the distance, he heard something unusual. People were crying. As the chariot moved closer, Siddhartha saw a group of mourners walking slowly along the road. Their faces were filled with grief. Some wept openly. Others stared silently at the ground. At the center of the procession was a wooden platform carrying a motionless figure covered in cloth. The prince felt an unfamiliar fear. What are they doing? He asked. Channa's voice became very soft. My prince, that man has died. The world seemed to stop. Died? Yes. The word felt strange. Heavy. Final. Siddhartha looked again at the still figure. No movement. No Buddhist. No life. For a long moment, he could not speak. Finally, he whispered, Will this happen to everyone? Channa closed his eyes briefly before answering. It is the destiny of every living being. The prince felt his heart sink. Everyone. Everyone. My father. Yes. My wife. Yes. My son. Yes. And me. The answer came like a whisper carried by the wind. One day, my prince. Even you. In that moment, something inside Siddhartha shattered. The palace no longer seemed like a paradise. Its golden walls suddenly felt fragile. Its pleasures felt temporary. Its promises felt empty. Because he now understood a truth that most people spend their lives trying to avoid. Everything that is born must age. Everything that lives can become sick. Everything that exists must eventually die. And as the funeral procession disappeared into the distance, Siddhartha felt a question rising within him. If suffering and death await everyone, then is there any way to find lasting peace? The answer would arrive sooner than he imagined, and it would come from a most unexpected person he had ever seen. For days after witnessing the funeral procession, Siddhartha felt as though he were living between two worlds. One world was the palace, a world of music, silk, laughter, and endless comfort. The other was the reality he had recently discovered, a world where every person grew old, where sickness could arrive without warning, where death waited patiently for kings and beggars alike. No matter how hard he tried, he could no longer return to the innocence he once possessed. The questions followed him everywhere. When musicians performed, he thought of the old man. When servants brought him luxurious meals, he remembered the sick man lying beside the road. When he looked at his beloved wife and young son, a painful thought entered his heart. One day, they too would grow old. One day, they too would suffer. One day, they too would die. The realization haunted him. For the first time, Siddhartha saw that beneath the surface of every human life existed a quiet fear. The fear of losing what we love. The fear of change. The fear of death. Then one morning, during another journey beyond the palace walls, Siddhartha encountered something entirely unexpected. Walking slowly along a dusty road was a man unlike anyone he had ever seen before. His clothing was simple. His possessions were almost non-existent. He owned no palace, no wealth, no servants. And yet, his face radiated a calmness Siddhartha had never witnessed before. There was no fear in his eyes, no anxiety, no desperation, only peace. The prince watched him carefully. This made no sense. How could someone who possessed so little appear happier than those who possessed everything? Unable to contain his curiosity, Siddhartha turned to Channa. Who is that man? Channa followed his gaze. He is a wandering monk. A monk? Yes. He has left behind worldly possessions in order to seek wisdom and spiritual understanding. The prince continued staring. The monk walked with steady steps. His mind seemed untouched by the worries that burdened everyone else. For the first time since discovering the realities of suffering, Siddhartha felt something new. Hope. If old age existed, if sickness existed, if death existed, then perhaps there was also a way to face them without fear. Perhaps there was a truth greater than suffering, a wisdom greater than loss, a peace deeper than the temporary pleasures of the world. The image of the monk remained with him long after the journey ended. That evening, Siddhartha sat alone beneath the dark sky. The palace was quiet. A gentle wind moved through the gardens. Above him, countless stars shone across the heavens. For years, he had lived exactly as others expected. He had been a prince, a husband, a father, the future king of a great kingdom. But now another calling was beginning to emerge from deep within his soul. It was not a voice he heard with his ears. It was something far deeper, a pull toward a mystery he could not yet understand. The world had shown him suffering. Now he needed to discover whether suffering had an end. That night, while the kingdom slept peacefully around him, Siddhartha made a decision that would change the course of human history. A decision so shocking that, when the sun rose again, nothing would ever be the same. Before dawn arrived, the prince who had everything would prepare to leave it all behind. The night was unusually still. A silver moon hung high above the palace, casting long shadows across the quiet courtyards. The musicians had stopped playing. The servants had retired to their chambers. Even the guards seemed drowsy beneath the weight of the late hour. But Siddhartha could not sleep. The decision he had made was now standing before him like an open door. For years, he had searched for happiness within the walls of the palace. He had tasted every pleasure. He had enjoyed every luxury. He had experienced everything his father believed could satisfy a human heart. Yet the questions remained unanswered. Why do people suffer? Why must they grow old? Why must they become sick? Why must they die? And perhaps the most important question of all, is there a way beyond suffering? The deeper he looked into the world, the more he realized that no amount of wealth could protect anyone from these realities. Gold could not stop aging. Power could not stop illness. Love itself could not prevent death. And so, on that silent night, Siddhartha knew what he had to do. Before leaving, he made one final journey through the palace. Slowly, he walked through the dark corridors he had known since childhood. Every room carried memories. Every doorway reminded him of a life he was about to leave behind forever. Eventually, he arrived outside the chamber where his wife Yasodhara and their infant son were sleeping. The door stood slightly open. Moonlight spilled across the floor. For a long moment, Siddhartha stood motionless. Inside, he could see them resting peacefully. His son slept beside his mother, unaware that history was about to change. A wave of emotion swept through him. He loved them deeply, more deeply than words could express. Part of him wanted to stay. Part of him wanted to forget everything he had discovered and remain within the safety of the life he had always known. But another part of him understood something painful. If he stayed, the questions would never leave him. He would grow old without answers. He would watch those he loved suffer without understanding why. And he would die carrying the same uncertainty that troubled every human being. Quietly, he whispered a farewell that no one would hear. Then he turned away. The choice had been made. Outside the palace, his loyal companion Channa waited with his horse, Kinthaka. Neither fully understood the significance of what was about to happen. The gates of the palace opened. The prince mounted his horse, and together they rode into the darkness. Behind him lay wealth, comfort, power, and certainty. Ahead of him lay hardship, uncertainty, and a path no one could map. As the palace disappeared into the distance, Siddhartha looked back one final time. The lights of his former life glowed faintly against the horizon. Then they vanished into the night. By dawn, the prince had traveled far from the kingdom. There, beside a quiet river, he stopped. Without hesitation, he removed the royal jewels he had worn all his life. The symbols of status, the symbols of power, the symbols of identity. One by one, he set them aside. Then he cut off his long hair, a traditional sign that he was leaving his old life behind. The man who stood there now was no longer a prince, no longer a future king, no longer the person the world expected him to be. For the first time in his life, he was simply a seeker, a man searching for truth, a man willing to risk everything for an answer. But Siddhartha had no idea how difficult the road ahead would become, because the journey he was beginning would take him to the very edge of human endurance. And before he could discover enlightenment, he would first have to confront the darkness within himself. At first, Siddhartha believed the answers would come quickly. Surely, somewhere in the forests and mountains of ancient India, there must be wise teachers who already understood the secrets of life and death. So he traveled from village to village, seeking out the most respected spiritual masters of his time. Many welcomed him. Many shared their teachings. And Siddhartha learned with extraordinary speed. Again and again, his teachers were amazed by him. He mastered meditation techniques that had taken others decades to learn. He explored states of consciousness few people had ever experienced. He discovered deep stillness, moments of profound peace, moments when the ordinary world seemed to disappear entirely. Yet every time he emerged from those states, the same realization returned. The suffering of humanity still remained. The fear of death still remained. The answers he sought were still beyond his reach. And so he continued searching. Years passed. Eventually, Siddhartha became convinced that perhaps the problem was not that he had enjoyed too much comfort. Perhaps he had not sacrificed enough. Perhaps truth could only be discovered through extreme hardship. This belief led him into one of the most difficult chapters of his life. He joined a small group of ascetics living deep within the wilderness. These men believed that enlightenment could be achieved by completely denying the needs of the body. They rejected comfort. They rejected pleasure. They rejected almost everything that ordinary people considered necessary for life. Siddhartha threw himself into their practices with the same determination he brought to everything else. He ate less and less, sometimes only a few grains of rice each day, sometimes almost nothing at all. Weeks became months. Months became years. His body began to change. The strong young prince who had once lived in luxury slowly disappeared. His ribs pressed against his skin. His cheeks became hollow. His bones became visible beneath his flesh. Ancient accounts describe him becoming so thin that people could count every rib in his body. His strength faded. Simple movements became exhausting. At times, he became so weak that standing felt impossible. Yet he refused to stop. He believed he was approaching the truth. He believed that if he pushed just a little further, enlightenment would finally reveal itself. But one day, something happened that changed everything. As Siddhartha attempted to walk, his weakened body suddenly collapsed. The world spun around him. Darkness closed in. For a brief moment, he stood at the edge of death itself. Lying there, barely conscious, a startling thought entered his mind. What if this path is wrong? What if destroying the body does not free the mind? What if truth cannot be found through suffering alone? The realization shook him. For 6 long years, he had pursued the harshest practices imaginable. And yet he was no closer to enlightenment than when he had begun. At that moment, a memory surfaced from deep within his childhood. He remembered sitting beneath a tree as a young boy. He remembered a feeling of natural peace. Not forced, not painful, not extreme, simply calm, simply aware, simply present. And suddenly, he understood something that would transform his entire journey. Both extremes were traps. The luxury of the palace had not brought wisdom, but neither had the torture of self-denial. The answer lay somewhere in between, a middle path, a path of balance, a path that neither worshipped pleasure nor glorified suffering. As this understanding dawned upon him, Siddhartha made a decision that shocked the ascetics around him. He would abandon the path of extreme hardship. He would nourish his body again. He would continue his search in a completely different way. The others believed he had failed. They believed he had lost his determination. One by one, they turned away from him and left. Soon Siddhartha found himself completely alone. Alone in the forest. Alone with his thoughts. Alone with the greatest question of his life. But for the first time in many years, he felt that he was finally moving in the right direction. What he did not yet know was that destiny was drawing near. Very soon, he would sit beneath a tree that would become one of the most sacred places on earth. And there, during a single extraordinary night, everything would change forever. The sun was beginning to set when Siddhartha arrived at the banks of the Naranjara River. The evening sky glowed with shades of gold and crimson. A gentle breeze moved through the trees. After years of searching, years of struggle, years of disappointment, he felt something he had not felt in a very long time. Clarity, not certainty, not enlightenment, but clarity. For the first time, his mind was no longer chasing one extreme or another. He was no longer a prince seeking pleasure. He was no longer an ascetic seeking suffering. He was simply a seeker of truth. Nearby stood a magnificent fig tree whose branches stretched wide across the fading sky. To most people, it was simply another tree, but history would remember it by a different name. The Bodhi Tree, the Tree of Awakening. Siddhartha approached it slowly. Then he sat down upon the earth beneath its sheltering branches. The ground was cool beneath him. The air was still. The world seemed to hold its breath. There, as darkness gradually descended across the land, Siddhartha made a vow unlike any he had ever made before. His voice was quiet, but his determination was absolute. I will not rise from this place until I discover the truth. No matter how long it took, no matter what happened, no matter what he would have to face. Tonight, the search would end, or he would die trying. As the hours passed, Siddhartha turned his attention inward. His breathing slowed. His thoughts grew quiet. The distractions of the outer world gradually faded. Yet the deeper he traveled into his own mind, the more powerful the challenges became. Ancient Buddhist traditions describe what happened next through the mysterious figure known as Mara. Some interpret Mara as a supernatural being. Others see Mara as a symbol of the fears, desires, and illusions hidden within every human heart. Whatever the truth may be, the struggle that followed was unlike anything Siddhartha had ever faced. As night deepened, terrifying visions appeared before him. Storms seemed to rage around him. Thunder shook the heavens. Dark armies emerged from the shadows. Voices whispered words of doubt. You will fail. You are wasting your life. No human being can discover what you seek. The fears that haunt all people rose from the darkness. Fear of failure, fear of loneliness, fear of death, fear of the unknown. Yet Siddhartha remained still. He neither fought the visions nor fled from them. He simply observed them, and one by one, they began to lose their power. When fear could no longer move him, temptation arrived. The legends say that Mara sent beautiful illusions to distract him. Visions of pleasure, visions of comfort, visions of everything he had left behind. The palace, the wealth, the luxury, the life that could still be his if only he abandoned this impossible quest. But Siddhartha had already seen through the illusion. He knew that every pleasure eventually faded. Every possession eventually vanished. Every attachment eventually changed. So once again, he remained unmoving. The visions dissolved. The night grew deeper. And then came the final challenge. Not fear, not desire, but the oldest illusion of all, the illusion of self. The voice within that says, "This is me. This is mine. This is who I am." As Siddhartha looked deeper than ever before, he began to see that everything he had called self was constantly changing. His body changed. His thoughts changed. His emotions changed. His memories changed. Nothing remained fixed. Nothing remained permanent. Like clouds drifting across the sky, all things appeared and disappeared. And in that realization, something extraordinary began to happen. The walls that separated him from life itself started to fall away. The darkness of ignorance that had hidden reality for so long began to lift. The truth was near, closer than it had ever been. Above him, the stars slowly crossed the night sky. The world remained silent. And beneath the Bodhi tree, a man sat on the edge of the greatest discovery of his life. Soon, as dawn approached, Siddhartha Gautama would see reality with complete clarity. And when the first light of morning touched the earth, the man who had begun this journey would no longer exist. In his place, the world would awaken to someone entirely new. The night was nearing its end. Above the Bodhi tree, countless stars shimmered in the darkness, silent witnesses to a moment that would echo across thousands of years. Siddhartha remained perfectly still. Hours had passed, yet he no longer seemed aware of time. The fears had vanished. The temptations had vanished. The endless stream of thoughts that had once filled his mind had become quiet. For the first time in his life, he was seeing reality exactly as it was. Not as he wished it to be, not as he feared it might be, but as it truly was. As his awareness deepened, he began to see existence itself unfolding before him. He saw how every action creates consequences, how every thought leaves a trace, how every choice shapes the future. Nothing existed in isolation. Everything was connected. Everything influenced everything else. Then his vision expanded even further. He saw countless beings moving through the cycles of birth and death, generation after generation, lifetime after lifetime, all searching for happiness, all trying to escape suffering. Yet most remained trapped within the same endless pattern, chasing what could never last, fearing what could never be avoided, holding tightly to things destined to change. And from this attachment came suffering. From this ignorance came suffering. From this endless grasping came suffering. Suddenly, Siddhartha understood what he had spent years searching for. Suffering was not a punishment. It was not a curse. It was not something imposed upon humanity by an angry force. It arose because people misunderstood the nature of reality itself. They believed permanent happiness could be found in temporary things. They clung to what was constantly changing. They built their lives upon illusions. And when those illusions inevitably crumbled, pain followed. The truth became clearer and clearer, like clouds dissolving before the rising sun. He saw that freedom was possible, not by controlling the world, not by escaping life, not by avoiding change, but by understanding reality so completely that fear and attachment could no longer dominate the mind. For a brief moment, words become inadequate. Ancient texts describe it as awakening, enlightenment, liberation, the extinguishing of the fires of ignorance. Whatever name we give it today, something profound happened beneath that tree. The man who had been searching was gone. The confusion was gone. The fear was gone. The endless hunger for something more was gone. In its place arose a peace unlike anything he had ever known. A peace not dependent on circumstances. A peace not dependent on wealth. A peace not dependent on youth, health, or even life itself. As dawn slowly approached, the first rays of sunlight appeared on the horizon. Birds began to sing. The darkness of night gave way to morning. And beneath the Bodhi tree, Siddhartha opened his eyes. The world looked exactly the same. The river still flowed. The trees still swayed in the breeze. The sky still stretched endlessly above him. Yet everything had changed, because the one who looked upon the world had changed. The prince was gone. The seeker was gone. In their place sat the Buddha, the awakened one. For a long time, he remained silent, not because he had nothing to say, but because what he had discovered seemed almost impossible to explain. How could words describe a truth beyond words? How could language capture a reality deeper than thought itself? For a moment, he wondered whether anyone could understand, whether humanity was ready to hear what he had learned. But as he looked upon the world with eyes filled with compassion, he saw something important. People were suffering, not because they were evil, not because they were weak, but because they did not yet see clearly. And if suffering had a cause, then it also had a solution. At that moment, the Buddha made a decision. He would not keep this discovery for himself. He would spend the rest of his life sharing the path he had found, a path that could help others free themselves from fear, attachment, and suffering. The journey that began with a prince leaving a palace had finally reached its destination. But an even greater journey was about to begin, because now the Buddha would step back into the world, and millions of lives would never be the same again. The road to Sarnath stretched across dusty plains and quiet forests. As the Buddha walked, villagers occasionally passed him along the way. Some glanced at him only briefly. Others stopped and stared. There was something unusual about him. His clothing was simple. His possessions were few. Yet his presence seemed different from anyone they had ever encountered. The anxiety that burdened most people was absent from his face. The endless hunger for more was absent from his eyes. He walked with a peace that seemed untouched by the world. Days later, he arrived at the deer park near Sarnath. There, the 5 ascetics who had once practiced alongside him were living together. These are the same men who had abandoned him years earlier. When Siddhartha accepted food and gave up extreme self-denial, they believed he had failed. In their minds, he had turned away from the path. Now, seeing him approach from a distance, they spoke among themselves. Here comes the man who abandoned the discipline. We should not honor him. We should not greet him. We should treat him as an ordinary wanderer. But as the Buddha drew closer, something unexpected happened. The men felt their resolve weakening. There was a calmness about him they could not explain, a quiet strength unlike anything they had ever witnessed. Without fully understanding why, they rose to their feet. One brought water, another prepared seat, a third greeted him respectfully. The moment they stood before him, they sensed that the man approaching was not the same man they had once known. Something profound had changed. The Buddha sat down. For a few moments, silence filled the air. Then he began to speak, not as a prince, not as a philosopher, not as someone seeking approval. He spoke as someone who had seen something directly, something real, something transformative. He told them about the years of luxury within the palace. He told them about the years of extreme suffering in the forest. And he explained why both paths had failed. Pleasure alone could not bring lasting peace. Neither could self-torture. Both were extremes. Both kept the mind trapped. Instead, he taught what he called the middle way, a path of balance, a path of wisdom, a path that avoided both indulgence and needless suffering. The 5 men listened carefully. For the first time, someone had offered an explanation that made sense of human suffering. The Buddha then revealed the insight that had changed everything. He explained that suffering exists, that suffering has causes, that suffering can end, and that there is a path leading to that freedom. These teachings would later become known as the 4 Noble Truths. Simple, direct, yet powerful enough to transform lives for thousands of years. As the Buddha spoke, something remarkable happened. The confusion that had clouded the minds of the listeners began to clear. One of the 5 ascetics, a man named Kandana, suddenly understood. Not merely intellectually, not merely as an idea, but deeply, directly. His perspective shifted. The truth the Buddha was describing became visible to him. According to tradition, Kandana became the first person to truly understand the Buddha's teaching, the first disciple, the first member of what would later become the Buddhist community. The Buddha smiled gently. The journey that began beneath the Bodhi tree was now spreading to others. A flame had been lit, and unlike an ordinary flame, this one would not consume. It would illuminate. From 5 disciples, there would soon be 50, then hundreds, then thousands. Kings would listen, Farmers would listen. Merchants, warriors, scholars, and wanderers would listen. The message born beneath a tree in northern India would cross mountains, deserts, oceans, and centuries. But before that could happen, there was someone the Buddha needed to face. Someone who had spent years wondering where his son had gone. Far away, within the royal palace he had left behind, an aging king was about to hear astonishing news. The prince who disappeared into the night was returning, but he was no longer a prince. Years had passed since the night Siddhartha left the palace. Yet for King Suddhodana, it felt as though that night had never truly ended. He still remembered waking to the shocking news. The prince was gone. The heir to the throne had vanished into the darkness. No forward, no explanation, only silence. At first, the king believed his son would eventually return. Surely the hardships of the world would break his resolve. Surely the comforts of palace life would call him home again. Weeks passed, then months, then years. But Siddhartha never returned. As time went on, rumors began to spread throughout the kingdom. Travelers spoke of a wandering teacher whose wisdom was attracting followers everywhere he went. Some claimed he possessed extraordinary insight. Others said he radiated a peace unlike anything they had ever witnessed. Many called him simply the Buddha, the Awakened One. At first, the king dismissed the stories, but eventually, too many reports arrived to ignore. The descriptions were always the same. The teacher had once been a prince. He had abandoned wealth. He had discovered a path beyond suffering. Deep inside, the king already knew. His son had fulfilled the prophecy. Not the part he had hoped for. The other part. The part he had spent his entire life trying to prevent. One morning, unable to wait any longer, the king sent messengers to invite the Buddha back to his homeland. But something strange happened. The messengers never returned. One after another, they found the Buddha, listened to his teachings, and chose to remain with him as disciples. The king could hardly believe it. Finally, he sent a trusted minister with strict instructions. Bring him back. Months later, the minister returned, and behind him walked the Buddha. When the people saw him entering the city, many were confused. Where were the royal robes? Where were the jewels? Where was the magnificent horse? Instead, they saw a simple monk walking barefoot through the streets. Yet the crowd quickly fell silent. There was something about him, something impossible to describe. He seemed completely at peace. The Buddha eventually arrived at the palace where he had spent his childhood. Everything looked familiar. The gardens, the halls, the walls that had once defined his entire world. Yet they no longer held power over him. The king waited inside. Older now, weaker now, the years had touched him just as they touch everyone. For a long moment, father and son stood facing one another. Neither spoke. The silence carried years of longing, years of disappointment, years of unanswered questions. Finally, the king broke the silence. "My son," he said, his voice trembling, "why did you leave?" It was not the question of a ruler. It was the question of a father. The Buddha looked at him with compassion. He understood the pain hidden beneath those words. Slowly, he explained that he had not left because he stopped loving his family. He had left because he loved humanity enough to search for a way beyond suffering. He explained that everything people cling to eventually changes. Youth fades, health fades, life itself fades. But wisdom can reveal a peace that remains even as the world changes around us. The king listened carefully. For years he had been angry. For years he had felt abandoned. Yet as he listened, something within him began to soften. For the first time, he saw that the son standing before him was no longer the young prince he once knew. The boy had disappeared long ago. In his place stood someone transformed. Someone who carried neither resentment nor pride. Someone whose compassion extended even to those who had misunderstood him. As the days passed, members of the royal family came to hear the Buddha's teachings. Many were deeply moved. Even those who had once questioned his decision began to understand. But among all who listened, one small boy watched with particular curiosity. He was Siddhartha's son, Rahula, the child the Buddha had left behind on that moonlit night many years ago. And very soon, the meeting between father and son would become one of the most touching moments in the entire story. A moment that would reveal what true inheritance really means. The young boy had heard stories about his father for years. Some said he had once been a prince. Others said he had become a holy man. Still others whispered that he was now the wisest teacher in the land. To Rahula, however, these stories were difficult to understand. He did not know the Buddha as a spiritual master. He did not know him as the awakened one. He only knew that this was the father he had never truly known. One morning, as the Buddha walked quietly through the palace grounds, Rahula approached him. The child looked up with curious eyes. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Rahula asked a simple question, a question that touched everyone who heard it. "Father, what inheritance will you leave me?" In the royal world where Rahula had been raised, inheritance meant wealth. It meant land, jewels, power, a future throne. The treasures passed from one generation to the next. The Buddha looked at his son carefully. He loved the boy deeply, yet he knew something most people did not. Every treasure of the world eventually disappears. Gold can be stolen, kingdoms can fall, beauty fades, power changes hands. Nothing material lasts forever. So the Buddha decided to offer Rahula something different, something no king could ever give, something no thief could ever take, the inheritance of wisdom. Soon afterward, Rahula joined the community of monks and began learning directly from the Buddha. At first, he was simply a child, curious, playful, sometimes distracted, sometimes impatient, just like any other young boy. But the Buddha treated him with extraordinary kindness and patience. He never forced him. He never demanded blind obedience. Instead, he encouraged Rahula to question, observe, and understand for himself. One day, the Buddha handed Rahula a small bowl filled with water. Holding it before him, he asked, "Rahula, do you see this water?" "Yes, Father." The Buddha then poured out the water and showed him the empty bowl. If a person does not value truthfulness, their goodness can disappear just as easily as this water. Rahula listened carefully. The lesson stayed with him for the rest of his life. Again and again, the Buddha taught through simple examples. Not complicated philosophy, not mysterious rituals, but practical wisdom. Be honest, be mindful, be compassionate, pay attention to your thoughts, pay attention to your actions. Learn to understand your own mind. Years passed. The young boy slowly grew into a thoughtful and disciplined student. The inheritance he received was not measured in gold or silver. It was measured in understanding. And unlike worldly wealth, it continued growing the more it was shared. As the Buddha's community expanded, people from every level of society began joining. Farmers sat beside nobles. Former criminals sat beside scholars. Rich and poor alike came seeking answers. The Buddha welcomed them all because he saw something deeper than status. He saw human beings, each carrying fears, each carrying hopes, each searching for peace. Among the countless people who came to hear his teachings, one man stood out from all the others. His name inspired fear throughout the land. Parents warned their children about him. Travelers changed their routes to avoid him. Soldiers hunted him without success. His hands were stained with blood. His reputation was terrifying. Many believed he was beyond redemption. Many believed he was a monster. But the Buddha saw something no one else could see. And the encounter between these two men would become one of the most extraordinary stories ever told. Because the next person to become the Buddha's disciple was a murderer. The man's name was Angulimala. Across the kingdom, his name was spoken in whispers. Travelers feared him. Villages feared him. Even armed soldiers avoided the forests where he was known to roam. Stories about him spread from town to town like dark legends. Some claimed he had killed dozens of people. Others claimed hundreds. Each story seemed more frightening than the last. What made the tales even more disturbing was the necklace he wore around his neck. According to tradition, Angulimala cut off a finger from each victim and strung them together like beads. It was this gruesome necklace that gave him his name. Angulimala, the finger garland. To most people, he was no longer a man. He was a nightmare, a monster, a symbol of fear itself. one morning, the Buddha learned that Angulimala was hiding within a nearby forest. The villagers begged him not to go. Please don't take that road. Many have died there. No one returns. But the Buddha listened quietly and continued walking. The people watched in disbelief. Had he not heard the stories? Did he not understand the danger? Or was there something he knew that they did not? Deep inside the forest, Angulimala spotted the lone monk approaching. At first, he smiled. This would be an easy victim. Another finger for his collection. Another life taken. Without hesitation, he grabbed his weapon and rushed forward. But something strange happened. No matter how fast he ran, he could not catch the Buddha. The monk continued walking calmly. Not running, not hurrying, simply walking. Yet the distance between them never seemed to close. Angulimala ran harder, faster. His breathing became heavy. His heart pounded. Still he could not reach him. Finally, exhausted and frustrated, he shouted, "Stop, monk!" To his astonishment, the Buddha stopped and turned around. Then he spoke words that would change Angulimala's life forever. "I've already stopped, Angulimala." The murderer stared at him, confused. "What do you mean? You're still walking?" The Buddha's eyes remained calm. "I have stopped harming others. I have stopped hatred. I have stopped violence." "But you have not stopped." The words struck Angulimala like lightning. For perhaps the first time in years, someone was not speaking to him with fear, not speaking with hatred, not speaking with anger. The Buddha was looking directly at him, not at the murderer, not at the monster, at the human being hidden beneath years of violence and suffering. Something inside Angulimala began to crack. The anger he had carried for so long suddenly felt heavy. The hatred felt empty. The life he had built suddenly seemed meaningless. For a long moment, neither man spoke. The forest itself seemed silent. Then Angulimala did something no one thought possible. He dropped his weapon. The sound echoed through the trees. Years of violence, years of fear, years of darkness. And in a single moment, he let them fall. Tears filled his eyes. He knelt before the Buddha. "Can someone like me ever change?" he asked. Many people would have answered no. Many would have demanded punishment. Many would have seen only the crimes. But the Buddha saw something deeper. He saw that transformation was possible, that even the darkest mind could awaken, that no human being was permanently trapped by their past. And so the Buddha accepted him, not as a criminal, not as an outcast, but as a disciple. The news spread quickly. People were outraged. Some refused to believe it. Others were furious. How could a murderer be welcomed into the community? How could such a man deserve forgiveness? But the Buddha continued teaching the same lesson. Hatred never ends hatred. Violence never ends violence. Only understanding can break the cycle. Only compassion can transform a human heart. Over time, Angulimala changed completely. The man who once spread fear, wherever he went, became known for humility and kindness. People who had once fled from him now stood amazed by what they witnessed. His story became living proof of one of the Buddha's most radical teachings. No matter how far a person has fallen, no matter how much darkness they carry, transformation is always possible. Yet even as the Buddha continued changing lives, the years were passing. The young prince who left the palace had become an old man. His hair had turned gray. His body had grown weaker. And soon, the final chapter of his earthly journey would begin. The teacher who had spent 45 years guiding others toward freedom was approaching his last days. And his final message would become one of the most powerful lessons he ever shared. 45 years had passed since the night of awakening beneath the Bodhi Tree. For 45 years, the Buddha had walked across the dusty roads of northern India. He had spoken to kings and beggars, to scholars and farmers, to the young and the old. Thousands had listened. Thousands had changed. And yet, despite the profound wisdom he shared, the Buddha never claimed to be a god. He never asked people to worship him. Instead, he encouraged them to look within themselves, to question, to observe, to discover the truth directly through their own experience. Now, however, the years were beginning to show. The Buddha was 80 years old. His body, like all bodies, was subject to the laws he had spent a lifetime teaching. The same impermanence he had spoken about countless times was now unfolding within him. His steps had become slower. His strength was not what it once had been. Yet his mind remained clear. His compassion remained limitless. And his presence continued to inspire everyone who came near him. One day, while traveling with a group of monks, the Buddha arrived at a small village. There, a devoted follower offered him a meal. The Buddha accepted it gratefully, but soon afterward, he became seriously ill. His disciples were deeply concerned. Some feared the worst. Others refused to believe that the teacher who had guided them for decades could one day leave them. Yet the Buddha remained calm, completely calm. As his condition worsened, he continued his journey toward a quiet grove of trees near a place called Kushinagar. The journey was difficult. Every step demanded effort, but he continued moving forward. Finally, he arrived at a peaceful grove surrounded by tall sal trees. The evening sun cast golden light through the branches. A gentle breeze moved through the leaves. The atmosphere felt strangely serene, as if nature itself understood the significance of the moment. There, between two great trees, the Buddha asked his followers to prepare a resting place. He lay down on his right side. The monks gathered around him. Many were struggling to hold back tears. Others wept openly. For years they had depended upon his guidance, his wisdom, his presence. The thought of losing him felt unbearable. Seeing their sorrow, the Buddha spoke softly. His voice was weaker now, but every word carried tremendous weight. Do not grieve. Everything that arises eventually passes away. Everything that is born eventually dies. This is the nature of all things. The disciples listened through their tears. The Buddha continued, perhaps knowing these would be among his final teachings. Be a light unto yourselves. Do not depend entirely on others. Do not blindly follow authority. Seek understanding through your own experience. Walk the path yourselves. These words would echo through centuries, because they captured the essence of everything he had taught. The truth was not something to be borrowed. It was something to be realized, something to be lived. As night slowly descended, the grove became quiet. The stars appeared overhead, one by one, just as they had on the night of his awakening many years before. The Buddha looked upon his disciples with compassion. There was no fear in his eyes, no regret, no attachment, only peace. A peace that had remained unshaken through praise and criticism, through success and hardship, through youth and old age. Then, gradually, his breathing became softer, and softer still. The disciples sat in silence. The forest remained still. The wind moved gently through the trees. And then, the Buddha passed peacefully into final nirvana. The teacher was gone, but his teachings remained. The voice had fallen silent, but the wisdom continued to speak. And over 2,500 years later, it still does. Because the story of the Buddha was never simply the story of one man. It was the story of every human being who has ever searched for meaning. Every person who has faced suffering. Every person who has wondered whether lasting peace is possible. And perhaps that is why his story continues to endure. Not because he claimed to save the world, but because he showed people how to awaken within it. The grove was silent. The disciples remained gathered beneath the trees long after the Buddha's passing. Some sat in meditation. Some wept quietly. Others simply stared into the darkness, struggling to imagine a world without the teacher who had guided them for so many years. The night seemed endless. Yet, as dawn slowly approached, something remarkable began to happen. The teachings remained. The Buddha's voice was gone, but his wisdom had not disappeared. It lived within the hearts of those who had listened. It lived within those who practiced. It lived within those who chose compassion over hatred, understanding over ignorance, peace over fear. In the years that followed, his disciples traveled across distant lands, carrying his teachings with them. They crossed mountains. They crossed deserts. They crossed rivers and oceans. Generations came and went. Kingdoms rose and fell. Empires appeared and vanished into history. Powerful rulers who once believed themselves immortal were forgotten. Magnificent cities crumbled into dust. Yet the teachings of the Buddha endured. Why? Perhaps because they addressed something timeless: the human heart. Even today, people struggle with the same fears that troubled humanity 25 centuries ago. The fear of loss, the fear of aging, the fear of uncertainty, the fear of death. Technology has changed. Civilizations have changed. The world itself has changed. But the inner struggles of human beings remain surprisingly familiar. And that is why the Buddha's story continues to resonate. Not because it belongs to the past, but because it speaks directly to the present moment. The prince who left his palace was searching for something many people are still searching for today: peace, meaning, freedom from suffering, a way to live without being controlled by fear, a way to face change without despair, a way to experience life fully while understanding its impermanent nature. Perhaps the greatest mystery of the Buddha's story is not that he became enlightened. Perhaps the greatest mystery is that the same potential he discovered exists within every human being. The Buddha never claimed to possess something unavailable to others. Again and again, he taught that awakening was possible for anyone willing to look deeply enough, anyone willing to question, anyone willing to understand, anyone willing to wake up from the illusions that cloud the mind. And so, the story does not truly end beneath the Bodhi tree, nor does it end in the grove at Kushinagar. In a way, it continues every time a person chooses kindness instead of anger, every time someone pauses before reacting in hatred, every time a human being looks within and asks, "Who am I? Why do I suffer? What truly matters?" More than 2,500 years have passed since a young prince walked away from a palace in search of answers. Yet his footsteps still seem to echo through history, not as the footsteps of a king, not as the footsteps of a conqueror, but as the footsteps of a seeker, a man who dared to confront the deepest questions of existence, and who discovered that peace was not hidden somewhere beyond the world. It was hidden within the way we see it. Perhaps tonight, as the world grows quiet around you and the stars shine above, just as they did on that ancient night in India, you might pause for a moment and reflect on the same question that changed Siddhartha's life forever. What if true peace has been closer than you ever imagined? What if the journey you have been searching for does not begin somewhere far away, but within your own heart? And with that question, the story of the Buddha becomes more than history. It becomes an invitation to awaken, an invitation to understand, an invitation to see clearly, just as one man did beneath a tree more than 25 centuries ago. And perhaps the journey is only beginning.